This is not activism, it's performance. The words explode across the stage like a sudden detonation, shocking the audience into silence. Zohran Mamdani's voice cuts through the air with the force of a gavel, and all eyes turn sharply toward him. His gaze is locked on Penn, the Hollywood actor turned political commentator, who sits across from him with a calm but incredulous expression. You come here and talk about justice, about change, about solidarity, but you live in a mansion far removed from the very struggles you claim to understand. You make speeches, you give interviews, you attend galas, but where are you when tenants are evicted? Where are you when workers collapse from exhaustion? Where are you when families line up at food banks? Activism is not a photo op. Justice is not a red carpet. You treat politics like a movie role, but people's lives are not a script. They are reality. And reality demands more than sympathy. It demands sacrifice. The hall shakes as cheers erupt from one side while the other erupts in boos, the clash of voices violent and raw. Penn leans forward, his face tightening, his voice calm but edged with steel. Zohran, you underestimate what voices like mine can do. You think politics is only fought in legislatures and rallies. But culture shapes politics. Stories shape people. Influence is not just money, it is the ability to move hearts, to bring awareness, to force conversations that politicians often avoid. You call it performance, but performance can ignite revolutions. Do you think movements survive without art, without symbols, without the cultural spark that forces people to pay attention? My role is not to pass laws. It is to shake the conscience of those who watch, and sometimes that can move mountains in ways legislation cannot. His supporters cheer, clapping wildly, while Mamdani's side jeers, the storm swelling in volume. Mamdani's voice returns, louder, sharper, like a thunderclap. Igniting conscience is not enough when people are still hungry, when people are still homeless, when people are still abandoned. You talk about symbols, but symbols without substance are illusions. What good is awareness if nothing changes? People cannot eat awareness. They cannot sleep under awareness. They cannot live on sympathy delivered through a microphone. Yes, art can inspire, but inspiration without action is theater. And America is drowning in theater while justice starves. The crowd explodes again, half cheering, half shouting down, the energy like a storm tearing through the walls. Penn raises his hand, his tone firm, unyielding. And I say theater can save lives. You think people act because of policy alone? Number. They act because they are moved, because they are inspired, because they believe change is possible. I have been in places politicians never go, war zones, disaster zones, refugee camps. I have seen suffering firsthand, and I have used my voice to amplify it, to make people listen. Don't dismiss that as performance. Sometimes performance is the only thing that wakes people up. The noise swells, chants of both names rising like two armies. Mamdani leans forward, his final words in this opening round booming with rage. And I say waking people up is not enough when you let them fall back asleep. Justice is not applause, it is action. And if culture does not lead to change, then it is not revolution, it is entertainment. And entertainment will not save a single life. The audience explodes again, the storm unstoppable, and the debate has only just begun. The storm inside the hall does not settle. It intensifies like fuel poured over a fire. The chants rise, Zohran, Zohran, on one side, Sean on the other, two forces colliding with such violence that the floor itself feels unsteady. Zohran Mamdani grips the podium tightly, his eyes locked on Penn, his voice carrying the urgency of a siren. You speak of influence as though it is salvation. But influence without accountability is vanity. You stand in war zones, you hold microphones, you give speeches that echo through screens, but then you fly back to safety. The people you film remain in the rubble, in the hunger, in the shadows. Leadership is not visiting the battlefield for applause. It is staying in the trenches until the fight is done. You have the power to move millions, but what have you built that lasts? Influence is not enough when systems remain intact, when injustice remains unbroken. Awareness without transformation is just noise. The audience on Mamdani's side erupts in thunderous cheers, clapping, stomping, voices shaking the room. Sean Penn does not flinch. He leans forward, his eye blazing with a different kind of fire, his voice calm but resonant. Zohran, you are mistaking my role. I am not a legislator. I am not a policymaker. I am a storyteller, and stories change the world. You think only laws matter, but laws follow culture. Culture shifts hearts, shifts minds, creates the climate where laws are even possible. Without stories, your bills are paper. Without emotion, your arguments are numbers. People do not march in the streets because of legislation. They march because their hearts are moved, their spirits awakened. And that awakening often comes from the voices you dismiss as performers. Do not underestimate the force of narrative. It can bring down walls. His supporters roar, their voices rising above the noise like waves smashing rock. Mamdani's voice cuts back, louder now, the sharpness of steel in every word. And I say stories without sacrifice are hollow. Yes, culture can ignite, but it must lead to construction. What good is a spark if it never becomes fire? You call yourself a storyteller, but I call you a spectator who wants to play hero. While you tell stories, millions live the suffering you only narrate. And narrating pain without changing it is not art. It is exploitation. You cannot sell suffering as inspiration while leaving the sufferers in chains. If your stories end when the credits roll, then you have entertained the world and abandoned the people. The audience gasps at the brutality of his words, half cheering in agreement, half booing with fury. Sean Penn's face tightens, his voice rising with raw conviction. Exploitation? Do not dare call it exploitation when I have risked my life in the same rubble, in the same disaster zones. I have been in places where no politician dares to go. I have faced bullets and bombs, and I have stood with the people you claim I ignore. Do not call me a spectator. I am a witness. And without witnesses, the world looks away. Without cameras, without stories, suffering is invisible. You want policy? Policy comes after visibility. Without storytellers, there is no momentum for change. I have made people look when they wanted to turn away, and sometimes that is the hardest, most dangerous work of all. His side of the hall roars, the noise deafening, his words hitting like punches. Mamdani does not wait, his voice rising like a tidal wave crashing down. And yet still the system stands. Still the suffering continues. Still the corporations profit while families break. Awareness must not be the end. It must be the beginning. Otherwise, it is a performance loop designed to soothe consciences without shaking power. Sean, you may stand in rubble, but rubble remains rubble unless rebuilt. And real rebuilding requires not just storytelling. It requires justice, sacrifice, solidarity. Until then, what you call witness, I call distraction. And distractions are deadly. The crowd erupts once more, the debate spiraling higher, louder, fiercer. The storm has only grown, and the night shows no signs of mercy. The noise in the studio has grown so violent it feels alive, a living creature made of chants, shouts, and stomps that pound against the stage like thunder. The moderator has long been reduced to a shadow at the corner, powerless to control the tempest that has consumed the room. Zohran Mamdani raises his voice, his words sharp, burning, impossible to ignore. Sean, you speak of witness as if it absolves responsibility. But witnessing is not enough when people are left to bleed, to starve, to struggle. You say you bring cameras to disasters, that you make the world look. But the world has been looking for decades, and still, injustice thrives. Looking is not saving. Recording is not rebuilding. If suffering remains after your cameras are gone, then your witness becomes spectacle, a tragedy packaged for applause. The crowd on his side roars, voices booming like cannon fire, while Sean Penn leans forward, his face tight with fury, his voice cutting through like a blade. Zohran, you insult not only me, but every artist, every activist who has used their platform to amplify the voices of the voiceless. Do not dismiss the courage it takes to stand in the fire. to be present where politicians hide. I have gone where bombs fall, where governments fail, where chaos reigns, and I did not go there for applause. I went there to draw the world's attention, to spark the outrage that pushes leaders to act. You think you carry the weight of justice alone? You think without storytellers, your speeches would even matter? Number. Without stories, you are a voice in an empty room. We carry the message to the masses, we ignite the spark, and without us, your fire never burns. His supporters erupt, clapping, shouting, their noise crashing like waves. Mamdani doesn't flinch. He leans in, his words fierce and relentless, like hammers on steel. You talk of courage, Sean, but courage without consequence is vanity. You say you carry voices, but what happens when those voices remain unheard by those in power? Awareness without accountability is a circle, a loop, a cycle designed to relieve guilt without changing reality. You want to inspire? Then stay in the fight after the cameras turn off. Inspiration is not enough. People need policy, justice, transformation. Until you deliver that, your role is not savior, it is spectator. And spectators do not end oppression, they consume it. The audience gasps, half of them cheering wildly, the other half booing so loudly it drowns out the floor. Sean Penn slams the table in front of him, his voice raw now, his composure slipping, his words like fire. Spectator? Do you know what it means to sit in the mud of a refugee camp? To carry a wounded child from rubble when no one else was there? To risk your own life to stand in solidarity when politicians like you sat comfortably in your offices debating words? I have lived it, Zohran. I have seen the horror up close. And I tell you this, without witnesses, the horror disappears. Without stories, the victims vanish into silence. You can pass 1,000 laws, but if no one feels the pain, no one will move to enforce them. Culture is not optional, it is essential. And you dismiss it because you fear its power. His words spark a storm of cheers from his side, chants of Sean, Sean, shaking the air. Mamdani responds instantly, his voice trembling with urgency, louder even than the storm around him. And I tell you this, Sean, witness without will is weakness. Story without sacrifice is theater. You may have stood in mud, you may have carried children, but the system remained. The cameras left, the world forgot, and the structures of greed stood untouched. You may shake consciences, but if power does not shake, then nothing changes. Real justice requires not just voices, it requires dismantling systems, building new ones, and standing with the people until the end. And that is something no gala, no stage, no headline can deliver. That requires more than starlight. It requires struggle. The studio quakes as chants of both names rise in collision, the storm reaching new heights. The debate no longer about actors or politicians, but about the very soul of change itself. Whether justice is born in policy or performance, in law or in story, in trenches or on stages. The air inside the studio feels heavy, as if every breath is weighed down by the roar of the crowd. Faces in the audience are red with shouting, veins pulsing in their necks, half screaming Zohran's name, half screaming Sean's. The atmosphere no longer that of a debate, but of a battlefield where words are weapons and applause is artillery. Zohran Mamdani slams his fist on the podium, his voice cracking like thunder across the hall. Sean, you romanticize the act of witnessing as if it alone bends history, but you ignore the cold truth. Systems do not fall because people feel sad. Systems fall because they are forced to fall. Families cannot eat awareness. Workers cannot pay rent with empathy. Children cannot survive on symbolic solidarity. To speak of witness without structural change is to hand the oppressed a mirror instead of a ladder. They see themselves reflected, yes, but they are still trapped in the pit. The left side of the crowd erupts into applause, their stomping echoing like drums of war. Sean Penn rises slightly from his seat, leaning over his podium, his voice sharp, raw, every word piercing the air. And I say your obsession with systems blinds you to the human heart. You speak of ladders and laws and structures, but people don't march for policies, Zohran. They march because they are moved. They cry because they see themselves in another's pain. They rise because their hearts are ignited. And who ignites them? Storytellers, witnesses, artists. Without us, your policies are just paper collecting dust. You can pass your laws, but if no one feels them, no one enforces them. It is culture that breathes life into justice, not the other way around. His supporters erupt, a tidal wave of cheers rolling across the studio. Mamdani answers instantly, his voice louder, heavier, a storm of conviction. And yet, while culture expires, the powerful remain untouched. You want to ignite hearts, but I want to break chains. What good is outrage if it fades in a week? What good is inspiration if it evaporates before dawn? You think your movies, your speeches, your headlines create change, but change without teeth is nothing but theater. And theater may entertain, it may provoke, but it does not liberate. Justice is not art. It is action. And action means power must be confronted, dismantled, redistributed. That cannot be done by symbols alone. It must be built in law, in policy, in the streets, in solidarity that does not leave when the cameras turn off. The audience erupts again, the storm surging higher, half of them cheering so loud it rattles the rafters. Sean Penn grips his podium tightly, his voice trembling, not with fear, but with passion, his words striking like arrows. And you underestimate the cost of being that symbol. Do you think it is easy to stand in front of the world, to risk reputation, to put your life in danger? You call it theater, but it is risk. Real risk. I have been where the bullets fly, where the bombs fall, where the bodies lie. I did not have to be there, but I chose to be. That is sacrifice, Zohran. That is solidarity. And do not tell me it means nothing. When the world watches, leaders are forced to act. I have seen it with my own eyes. That is not theater, it is courage. His side of the room explodes into cheers, stamping their feet, chanting his name with the fury of a rally. Zohran lifts his head, his voice breaking through like lightning, his final strike of this round. And I say courage without consequence is not enough. Witness without change is not enough. Standing in rubble does not rebuild homes. Carrying children does not dismantle systems. Real solidarity means staying until the fight is won, not leaving when the headlines fade. Courage is not choosing to visit the battlefield. It is choosing never to leave until victory belongs to the people. And that, Sean, is the difference between a performer and a revolutionary. The audience gasps, the clash too sharp to contain, the noise so deafening it feels like the roof itself may split open. The storm has reached its breaking point, and still, neither side yields. The atmosphere in the studio is no longer just electric. It is combustible, as if one more spark could set the entire place ablaze. The audience is on its feet, screaming, chanting, fists raised in dueling rhythms of Zohran, Zohran, and Sean. Sean, the moderator has given up on restoring order. History is writing itself in the collision of two voices, two worlds, two visions. Zohran Mamdani grips the podium with both hands, his knuckles white, his eyes blazing with an intensity that pins the room in place. His voice bursts forth like a verdict. Sean, you tell me stories inspire. You tell me symbols matter. You tell me witnesses can shake the conscience of the world. But the world's conscience has been shaken 1,000 times, and still the structures stand. Slavery ended because people fought, not because they wept. Civil rights advanced because people organized, not because they applauded. Workers won dignity because they struck, not because, they were inspired by a movie. Yes, stories can open eyes, but open eyes that close again change nothing. The powerful do not fear your art, Sean. They fear action. They fear solidarity. They fear laws that take away their privilege. And that is why justice is not born on stages. It is born in struggle. The left half of the hall erupts, their cheers like thunder crashing against the walls, their chants vibrating the floor beneath their feet. Sean Penn leans forward, his voice rising now with urgency, with fire as if he refuses to be overshadowed. And I say you underestimate the power of culture. Without it, revolutions never breathe. Without it, movements never rise. Stories give people language for their pain. Art gives them a vision of a world beyond their chains. Do you think laws were passed without songs to carry them, without plays to inspire them, without films to humanize the nameless? You act as though justice is built only in policy, but I tell you, justice needs a heartbeat, and culture is that heartbeat. You dismiss me as a performer, but performers have shaken empires, toppled dictatorships, ignited movements that policymakers were too afraid to start. Do not insult the power of a story, Zohran, because stories are the fire that lights your marches. His side roars, a tidal wave of cheers and stomps echoing like war drums. Mamdani doesn't wait, his voice surging back, louder, sharper, the fury of conviction pouring through every word. And yet, while the fire burns, the people still starve. You call stories the heartbeat, but hearts stop without food, without homes, without care. You talk about films, songs, plays, but none of them house the evicted. None of them cure the sick. None of them raise wages. Yes, culture can inspire, but it must be tied to change. Otherwise, it is anesthesia, soothing people into believing progress has been made while injustice remains untouched. That is why I say, your stories may shake consciences, but if power does not shake, then the people remain shackled. True justice is not art, it is action. True solidarity is not telling their story, it is fighting their fight. The crowd explodes again, the storm at its absolute peak, the clash deafening. Penn raises his hand, his voice trembling now with both fury and passion, his words cutting through the chaos like steel. And I say action without story is invisible. You can pass your bills, but if no one cares, they die in silence. You can organize, but if no one is moved, no one joins. Culture does not replace struggle, Zohran, it fuels it. You talk as though I stand apart, but I have stood in rubble. I have held the suffering in my arms. I have risked my life not for applause, but for solidarity. Do not tell me that means nothing. Without witnesses, without storytellers, the struggle suffocates in shadows. You fight in the streets, I fight on the stage. Together, they can change the world. Alone, they fail, the right side roars, his supporters stomping so hard the cameras shake. Mamdani slams his fist one final time, his words exploding like a final thunderclap. Then let me tell you this, Sean, the world does not need stages. It needs justice. The world does not need performances. It needs power in the hands of the people. Stories may spark, but sparks die without fuel. Justice is that fuel. And until we fight for it, until we win it, until we guarantee it, your performances are only shadows on the wall. Justice must not be performed. It must be lived. The hall shakes, the noise unbearable, chants colliding like storms. The moderator stepping in at last to declare the debate over, though no one listens. The roar spills into the streets, into homes, into millions of hearts watching across the world. And as the cameras fade to black, the question lingers heavy, haunting, unresolved. Will the future of justice be written in stories that inspire or in struggles that transform?